curtains, casting delicate patterns on the walls. The room was filled with the gentle sounds of crying babies and the faint rustle of sheets. She moved around the room, organizing the supplies with practiced grace. Each crinkle of the fresh bed linens and each tidy toy brought her a sense of purpose. The orphanage had become her life's work, a sanctuary not just for the children it sheltered, but for herself as well. Just another day, Margaret whispered to herself, a habit she had formed over the years. At 52, she had seen countless children come and go, each leaving an indelible mark on her heart. She had learned to cherish the fleeting moments, the laughter, the tears, and the triumphs of growth. Today were different, though today a new baby would arrive. And with that arrival came a mix of excitement and anxiety as she adjusted the stuffed animals on the shelf. Margaret's thoughts drifted back to her own childhood, growing up in a small town where she had been fortunate enough to have a loving family. But many of her friends had not been so lucky. The memories of her classmates who had spent time in foster care or orphanages always weighed heavily on her. Those experiences had fueled her dedication to this place, a refuge for lost children. Margaret called a voice from the hallway, breaking her recovery. It was Emily, the bright-eyed volunteer who had started helping out a few months ago. "I think the police are here." Margaret's heart raced. Oh dear. Already she hurried to the entrance of the nursery, smoothing down her apron as she went. Emily stood at the door, excitement sparkling in her eyes. "Do you think it's the baby?" she asked. Bouncing on her toes. "Let's find out," Margaret replied, her voice steadying as she took a deep breath. She had been anticipating this moment, but the reality of it made her stomach flutter. As they reached the entrance, they found Officer Collins waiting patiently, a bundle wrapped in a faded, tattered blanket cradled in his arms. The sight of the tiny face peeking from the blanket sent a rush of warmth through Margaret's heart, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of anxiety. "Good morning, Officer Collins," she said, stepping forward. "Is this the new arrival?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. "We found her abandoned at the park just a few hours ago. I thought it best to bring her here directly." Margaret reached out her arms, and with a gentle motion, Officer Colley placed the baby into her embrace. The warmth of the child's small body sent the rush of maternal instinct through her. She held the baby close, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of tiny breaths against her chest. "What's her name?" Emily asked, peering closely at the baby's face, her youthful curiosity shining through. "We didn't find any identification with her," Officer Collins explained, his brow furrowed with concern. "But I thought you might want to take a look at her and see if you can identify anything." Margaret nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. She carefully unwrapped the baby from the blanket, her hands trembling slightly as she revealed the delicate features. She felt a rush of tenderness. The baby's eyes were closed, long lashes resting gently against her cheeks. "Look at her," Emily whispered, awe filling her voice. "She's beautiful." "Yes, she is," Margaret agreed softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But she's also a mystery." As she continued to unwrap the blanket, a small glint caught her eye. Margaret paused. Her breath hitching around the baby's neck was a tiny locket, its surface dull and tarnished but still intact. With careful fingers, she reached to touch it, her heart pounding in anticipation. "What's that?" Emily asked, leaning closer, intrigued. "I'm not sure," Margaret replied, her heart racing as she gently unclasped the locket. She opened it, revealing a small engraved inscription inside. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she read the name Isabella. Margaret's mind raced. Isabella, the name eed in her thoughts, conjuring a whirlwind of questions. Who was this child? Why had she been left at the park? And who had chosen this name for her? Isabella. Emily repeated, her brow furrowing. "That's a lovely name. Do you think that's her name?" "I don't know," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly. "It felt like it could be, but we needed to find out more about this locket. Could be a clue." That Officer Collins observed their interaction as a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've seen cases like this before," he said, his tone serious. "That sometimes children are left behind for a reason. We need to make sure she's safe and cared for." Margaret nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. "Of course, we'll do everything we can to protect her." As she cradled Isabella gently, She felt a surge of determination. This child deserved love and a chance at a better life, just like all the others she had cared for over the years. But the locket, what if it held the key to Isabella's past? What if it revealed secrets that would change everything they thought they knew? "Let's get her settled in," Margaret said, her voice firm. "We can't let her stay in the nursery forever. She needs a home, even if it's just for now." Emily nodded eagerly, a smile breaking through her earlier seriousness. "I can help. I'll prepare the crib and gather some clothes." "She'll need everything. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate your help more than you know," Margaret replied, her heart swelling with gratitude together. They moved to the nursery, a new chapter unfolding in the life of the orphanage, one that would intertwine their fates in ways they could not yet imagine as they worked. Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The arrival of Isabella would set into motion a series of events that would challenge their lives and reveal truths they had never considered. And as the sun continued to rise, casting its golden light over the orphanage, Margaret felt a quiet resolve settle within her. She would uncover the truth behind this little girl and protect her with everything she had. David sat at his desk in the small fluttered office of the Social Services Agency, a stack of case files towering precariously beside him. The afternoon light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across his paperwork. But he was too lost in thought to notice his mind was consumed by the latest case that had fallen into his lap. The mysterious baby left at the orphanage. He leaned back in his chair, the creaking sound echoing the unease he felt within. He reached for the file, flipping it open to reveal a photograph of the infant, a tiny cherub with delicate features and dark, curious eyes. The image tugged at something. Deep inside him, a flicker of nostalgia that was both comforting and painful. He remembered his own childhood, the way he had been shuffled from one foster home to another. The outsider, always searching for a place to belong. The emotional scars ran deep, reminders of nights spent longing for stability, for love, for a family that had never truly been his David. The familiar voice of his colleague, Sarah, broke through his recovery. She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, and a concerned look etched on her face. "You've been at this for hours, are you okay?" He forced a smile, though it felt heavy on his lips. "Just going over the baby's case, Cass. It's complicated, more like heartbreaking." She stepped into the office, heels clicking softly on the floor. "You know you can't save them all, right? You can't carry the weight of every child in the system." David met her gaze, the warmth in her eyes, a stark contrast to the chill of his own memories. "I know, but this baby, there's something about her. I can't shake the feeling that there's a story behind her being left at the orphanage. I need to find out what happened." Sarah sighed, her expression softening. "You've always been driven by a sense of justice, but remember, sometimes the answers we seek can hurt more than the questions." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Maybe you should take a break, clear your head." "I can't," David replied, his voice firmer than he intended. "Not until I know more about her. Someone left her there, for a reason, and I need to understand that reason." With a resigned nod, Sarah stepped back, giving he space. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." "All right, I'll be in the break room if you need me." As the door clicked shut, David returned to the case file, his mind racing. He found himself tracing the outline of the locket in the photograph, so small yet so significant. What did the name Isabella mean? Who was she? And more importantly, why had someone chosen to abandon her? Meanwhile, in the orphanage, Emily was busy entertaining. A small group of children in the playroom, the sound of laughter filled the air, a sweet melody that warmed her heart. She had always loved working with kids, finding joy in their innocence and unfiltered curiosity. Today, however, her mind drifted to the new arrival, the baby with the locket. "Miss Emily, look what I made," shouted a little girl named Lily, holding up a lopsided paper crown adorned with glitter and crayon scribbles. "It's beautiful, Lily." Emily exclaimed, kneeling down to admire the crown. "You're a true artist. I think you should wear it." Lily beamed with pride as she placed the crown at the top of her head. "I'm a princess. Absolutely, every princess needs a kingdom." Emily replied, smiling. She glanced over at the other children who were busy building a fort out of cushions and blankets. Their laughter and chatter filled the room with a delightful chaos that reminded her of her own childhood yet. In the midst of the laughter, a sense of unease settled in her stomach. She couldn't stop thinking about the baby. What was her story? Why had she been left at the orphanage? A part of her felt a deep desire to connect with the infant, to offer her the love and care that every child deserves. Who's the baby one of? The boys, Tommy asked, breaking her train of thought. His eyes were wide with curiosity, searching for answers. Emily knelt beside him, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Her name is Isabella. She's really little and needs lots of love. Can we see her? Another child chimed in, her voice high-pitched with excitement, of course, but we have to be very gentle. Emily said, feeling a rush of enthusiasm. How about we make some drawings for her? We can show her how much we care. The children erupted in cheers, diving for crayons and paper as they created their masterpieces. Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wanted to be a source of comfort for Isabella, to help her feel safe and loved in a world that had already seemed so harsh later that afternoon. After the children had settled down for a nap, Emily found herself wandering toward the nursery. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart. The sight of the tiny baby nestled in the crib, swaddled in a soft blanket, tugged at her heartstrings. "Hey there, little Isabella," she whispered. Stepping inside, the baby stirred slightly, her dark eyes fluttering open, and for a moment Emily felt a connection that transcended words. "You're going to be okay. I promise to look after you." Just then, Margaret entered the nursery, her expression warm, yet tinged with concern. "Emily, I'm glad to see you here. It seems like you have a special bond with her already." "I do, Emily," replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's just something about her, I can't explain it." Margaret smiled softly, reaching down to gently stroke Isabella's cheek. "She needs us, and we will do everything we can to make sure. She feels loved and safe, but we also need to uncover the truth about her past." The locket means something, nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of uncertainty. "What do you think it means?" "I don't know yet," Margaret admitted, her brow furrowing in thought. "But I have a feeling it will lead us to answers we desperately need." As they share a moment of silence, contemplating the fragile life before them, the door creaked open and David stepped inside. The tension in the air shifted as he approached the crib, his eyes locking onto the baby's face. "Isabella," he said softly, the name rolling off his tongue like a promise. "She's beautiful." Margaret turned to him, her expression serious. "David, we need to talk about the locket and what it could mean for her future." David nodded, his gaze shifting back to the baby. "I've been thinking about it. It reminds me of my own search for belonging. I want to help her find her family if she has one." Margaret exchanged a knowing look with Emily, sensing the weight of his words. "It's not just about finding her family, David. It's about understanding why she was left here in the first place. We need to tread carefully." "I understand," he replied, a flicker of determination igniting in his eyes. "But we owe it to her to uncover the truth for Bella's sake and for our own." As the three of them stood together in the nursery, the air thick with unspoken questions and shared hopes, they knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but they also understood that together they could face whatever secrets lay ahead, united in their mission to protect the baby who had already captured their hearts. Margaret sat at her desk, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, casting a warm glow on the cluttered surface she had been, staring at the phone, willing it to ring. But the silence hung heavy in the room. The mystery of the baby's origin gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that the locket and the name inscribed within it held the key to a much larger story. Determined to uncover the truth, she picked up the receiver and dialed the number of the local hospital. "Hello, St. Jude's Hospital. How may I assist you?" a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, this is Margaret from the Starlight Orphanage. I'm looking for information regarding a baby recently left at our facility. I was wondering if you could help me check if there were any records of a mother giving birth around the time the baby was found." Margaret said, her voice steady despite the urgency she felt. "Certainly, could you Provide me with the baby's name or any details." Margaret hesitated, recalling the name Isabella that was engraved on the locket. "I don't have a name, but the baby is a girl and she was found just a few days ago." "Let me check. Our records," the nurse said, her tone shifting to one of professionalism. Margaret could hear typing in the background, the sound echoing her own racing thoughts. After a long pause, the nurse returned. "I'm sorry, but I don't see any records matching your description. It's possible that the mother didn't deliver. Here, there are several clinics in the area. Thank you for your help," Margaret replied, disappointment settling in her chest. She hung up the phone inside, faced with the growing mystery. She thought of the local clinics. If she couldn't find anything at the hospital, perhaps they would have more information. Meanwhile, Emily was in the nursery, gently rocking the baby in her arms. She had spent more time with Isabella than anyone else since the baby's arrival. The soft coos and gurgles from the infant brought a warmth to her heart that felt oddly comforting. There was something about the baby that stirred her deeply, a sense of connection that transcended words. "Hey there, little one," she murmured, looking down at the delicate features framed by wisps of dark hair. "You're going to be okay, I promise." She cradled Isabella close, feeling the warmth radiating from the baby's small body. As Emily gazed out the window, she thought about her own life. Her family was fractured. Her parents had divorced when she was a teenager, leaving her feeling lost. She had hoped to volunteer at the orphanage would provide her with a sense of purpose, but now, with Isabella in her life, she felt a stronger pull to understand not just the baby's story, but her own as well. "Is it weird that I feel like I need to protect you?" she whispered, brushing her fingers against Isabella's tiny hand. "I guess we're both looking for our place in the world. Huh?" Just then, David entered the nursery, a gentle smile on his face as he observed Emily with the baby. "Looks like you found a little companion," he said, his voice low so as not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere. Emily glanced up with a shy smile. SM returned his gaze. "She felt like a part of me. You know, it's like she understands." Without saying a word, David chuckled softly, stepping closer. Children have a way of doing that. They draw out emotions we didn't even know we were there. He paused, his expression turning serious. "Have you thought about what her future might be like?" "I can't stop thinking about it." Emily admitted, her brow furrowing. "I mean, what if she has family out there? What if we can't find them?" David nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "That's why we need to uncover her origins. We owe it to her." He took a deep breath, recalling his own childhood. Every child deserves to know where they come from. It's part of who they are. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe she will be," David replied, a reassuring warmth in his tone. "As long as we're here for her, she'll be okay." As David left the nursery, he couldn't shake the feeling that their search for Isabella's family would lead them down a path filled with unexpected revelations. He had his own demons to face, and the prospect of digging into someone else's past stirred an uneasiness within him. Later, Margaret was in her office, surrounded by papers and notes she had gathered from local clinics. She had spent hours making calls, but each lead seemed to fizzle out into nothingness. Just as she was about to give up, the phone rang again. "Hello," she answered, her voice tinged with hope. "Margaret, it's David. I think I found something," he said, his tone urgent. Margaret's heart raced. "What did you find?" "There's a woman named Laura who went missing. About a year ago, I came across her case while doing some research." David explained. "She might be connected to Isabella. I'm going to look into it further. I think we need to find her." Margaret's mind whirled with possibilities. "Do you have any leads on where she might be?" "Not yet, but I'm going to start by contacting the police department. They may have more information on her disappearance." David replied, "I'll keep you updated." "Thank you, David. This could be the breakthrough we need," Margaret said, her voice filled with renewed determination. After hanging up, she felt a surge of energy. Perhaps they were closer to finding Isabella's family than she had thought. She gathered her notes, ready to dive deeper into her investigation. Back in the nursery, Emily was still holding Isabella, lost in thought. The baby's tiny fingers curled around her own, and she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility washed over her. What if she could help this baby find her family? The thought ignited a fire within her. I'm going to find out who you really are, Isabella. She whispered, her resolve hardening. I won't let you be just a mystery. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Margaret, David, and Emily worked tirelessly, each following their own leads in the hope of uncovering the truth. Margaret reached out to various organizations that dealt with missing persons, while Emily dug into local social media groups, trying to piece together any clues they could find. One afternoon, while scrolling through an online forum dedicated to local news, Emily stumbled upon a post about Laura's disappearance. The comments were filled with speculation and concern. One comment caught her eye, a woman claiming to have seen Laura just a few weeks before she vanished, looking distressed and alone. Maybe this is it, Emily murmured to herself, her heart racing. She quickly grabbed her phone and called David, her excitement bubbling over. David, I think I found something, she said. As soon as he picked up, What is it? He asked, his voice steady but curious. There's a post on a local forum about Laura. Someone claims to have seen her a few weeks before she disappeared. I think we should check it out. Great work, Emily. Can you send me the link? I'll do it right now. As she ended the call, she felt a sense of purpose wash over her. Maybe they would unravel the mystery that surrounded Isabella. Margaret, David, and Emily were each driven by their own motivations, but they were united in a shared goal to give this baby a future filled with love and understanding. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the orphanage, they all felt a flicker of hope. Little did they know that the journey ahead would test their resolve and challenge everything they thought they knew about family belonging and the ties that bind them. Margaret and David drove down the winding road toward the nearby town, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken questions. Margaret's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the sunset glow filtering through the windshields. Each mile brought them closer to the answers they desperately sought about the mysterious baby left at the orphanage. It was a journey marked not only by physical distance, but also by the emotional weight of their quest. Do you think we'll find anything? David broke the silence, his voice laced with uncertainty. He turned his gaze toward Margaret, searching for reassurance in her expression. I hope so, Margaret replied softly, her eyes focused on the road. Ahead, Laura's friends might have seen or heard something, anything that could give us a clue about what happened to her and the baby. David nodded. Through the shadows of his past loomed large in his mind. He had grown up in the system, bouncing between foster homes, never quite finding a place to belong. The baby's situation resonated with him, deeply stirring a mixture of hope and dread. He too had been left behind, and the thought of unraveling this mystery filled him with both purpose and anxiety. As they arrived in the small town, Margaret parked outside a modest cafe where they had arranged to meet Laura's friends. The faded sign creaked in the gentle breeze, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted through the air. They stepped inside, greeted by the warm ambiance and the low murmur of conversations. Do you want to take the lead? Margaret asked, sensing David's tension. Sure, he replied, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He approached the counter where a waitress with bright red hair smiled at him. Can I help you? She asked, her tone friendly but curious. We're here to meet some friends of Laura, David said, trying to keep his voice steady. Do you know if they've arrived? Yeah, they're over there. She nodded toward a corner booth. David led Margaret to the booth where two women sat, both in their 30 seconds, their faces etched with worry. One had dark circles under her eyes, and the other fidgeted with a bracelet, her fingers nervously twisting the silver charm. Hi, I'm David, and this is Margaret, he introduced them. Thank you for meeting with us, of course, the woman with the bracelet said, her voice shaky. We've been worried sick about Laura. Can you tell us what you know? Margaret asked, gently, sensing the emotional turmoil in the room. The women exchanged glances, and the one with dark hair spoke first. Laura wasn't herself for a while. Before she went missing, she'd started hanging out with some rough crowds of people we didn't trust. Did she say anything about where she was going? David pressed, his heart racing at the implications. No, she just disappeared one day, the other woman replied, tears brimming in her eyes. We tried to call her, but her phone was off. It was like she vanished. Margaret leaned in closer here, voice soothing. Did she have any family or anyone who might know more about what was happening to her? The dark-haired woman nodded. Her mom lives in town, but they haven't spoken in years. Laura had a rough childhood. Her parents split when she was young. She never really dealt with it. David felt a familiar pang of sympathy. Do you think that could have led her to make choices that put her in danger? Definitely, the woman said. Her voice breaking. Laura was always looking for something: acceptance, love, something she felt she never got at home. Margaret's heart ached for the girl they were discussing and the baby. Do you think Laura might have given birth around the time she went missing? God, I hope not. The other woman whispered, clutching her bracelet tighter. If she did, I can't even imagine what she's been through. As they continued to talk, David felt a knot tightening in his stomach. The more they learned about Lara's life, the more he realized how fragile and interconnected their stories were. It was as if the universe was weaving their fates together, drawing them into a web of secrets and shadows. After a while, the conversation turned heavy, and David decided to steer it back toward the task at hand. Did Laura ever mention a locket, or anything that might have belonged to her family? Both women shook their heads, but the one with the bracelet seemed to hesitate. Actually, she did have this old necklace her grandmother gave her. It was a locket, but I can't remember what it looked like. She always said it was special, but she hardly ever wore it. Margaret exchanged a glance with David. Do you remember anything more about that locket, what it looked like or what it represented? It was old-fashioned with some engravings on it. The dark-haired woman recalled, her brow furrowing. But I don't know the details. I just remember her saying it was a family heirloom. David's mind raced. Could the locket they found with the baby be the same one? He felt a sense of urgency building within him. If we can find Laura's family, maybe they can help us understand more about her and the baby. Her mom might know something, the bracelet-wearing woman suggested, but she's been distant. You'd have to approach her carefully. Thank you for your honesty, Margaret said, placing a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. We'll follow up with Laura's mother. As they left the cafe, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the quiet streets. David's mind was a whirlpool of thoughts. The possibility of connecting the baby with her mother and understanding Laura's past felt like a daunting task, but also a necessary one. Back at the orphanage, Emily was hard at work in the nursery. She had taken a particular liking to the baby and was determined to uncover the mystery of the locket. With a notebook in hand, she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the soft toys and blankets she had arranged in a makeshift fort for the little ones. As she examined the locket closely, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The engravings were faint, but she could make out some letters. Isabella, she whispered, her heart racing. You're not just a name, you're part of someone's family. Emily had learned how to research online during her time at the orphanage, and she quickly set to work typing the name into the search bar. She found stories about the local families, some of whom had lived in the town for generations, and others who had dark pasts buried in the shadows of history. Hours went by as she sifted through articles and old records, her determination unwavering. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a mention of a family with the last name that matched the engraving on the locket. The article detailed a tragic event involving their daughter, who had vanished years ago, leaving behind unanswered questions and a family in turmoil. This must be it, Emily murmured to herself, her fingers trembling slightly as she clicked on the link. As she read through the details, she discovered that the family had a history of mental health issues and estranged relationships, painting a picture of a woman who had fought her demons alone. Just as she was piecing together the puzzle, her phone buzzed. It was David calling to check in. Hey, how did it go? Emily answered, her voice bubbling with excitement. We learned some things, David replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. But we need to find Laura's mother. It seems like she might hold the key to understanding everything. I think I found something too, Emily said, her heart racing. I've been researching the locket, and I think it belonged to a family that has a really complicated history. There's a chance they're connected to the baby. David's breath caught in his throat. That could be huge. Can you send me what you found? Absolutely, she replied, her mind racing with possibilities. I'll email you the details right now. As they spoke, Margaret returned to the orphanage, her face a mixture of fatigue and determination. "David, Emily, we might have a lead on Laura's mother." "We need to act quickly, great timing," David said, glancing in March. Margaret Emily uncovered something that could be significant. "I'm listening to Margaret," said, her eyes brightening with hope. Emily rushed to share her findings with the three of them gathered in the nursery, their hearts beating in sync as they began to connect the dots. The mystery was taking shape, but the shadows of the past loomed over them, whispering secrets yet to be revealed in that moment. They knew they were on the brink of discovering something that could change everything for the baby and the orphanage. David sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the wall, of the weight of his thoughts pressed heavily on his chest, constricting his breath. He had spent years running from his past, avoiding the emotions that came with it, but now faced with the innocent life of a baby left at the orphanage. He felt the walls of his defenses crumbling around him. The name Isabella echoed in his mind, a whisper that urged him to confront the truth he had buried deep within. He could no longer ignore the parallels between his own life and the life of the little girl. He rose and paced the small room, his heart racing. "What if she's just like me?" he muttered to himself, envisioning a child abandoned, longing for love and a sense of belonging. A shiver ran down his spine as he recalled his own experiences in foster care, the uncertainty of moving from one home to another, the feeling of being unwanted and invisible. "I can't let her go through that," he concluded, determination igniting him as he stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the small town. The familiar sights of his childhood loomed in the distance, each one a reminder of his struggles. David made his way to the orphanage, the place that had become his refuge, and unexpectedly a catalyst for change. He had always seen himself as a protector of children, but now it was time to protect not just them, but also the part of himself he had long neglected inside the orphanage. The nursery was quiet, the soft sound of a lullaby playing in the background. Emily was there, rocking the baby gently in her arms, her face illuminated by the soft light of the room. David's heart swelled at the sight of her nurturing demeanor. She was the embodiment of hope, a stark contrast to the shadows that haunted him. "Hey, Emily," he said, softly stepping closer. "How's she doing?" Emily looked up, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "She's amazing. I think she knows she's safe here," she replied, brushing a thumb across the baby's cheek. "I named her Isabella in my mind. It feels right, don't you think?" David nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "It does. We owe it to her to find out where she came from, to give her the family. She deserves." The weight of his own past hung heavily in the air as he spoke, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the little girl who needed him. Margaret entered the nursery, her presence calming the tension. "David, Emily," she greeted, her voice soft yet firm. "I've called a community meeting for tomorrow evening. I think it's important that we come together to discuss Isabella's future and what we can do to help." David felt a surge of gratitude for Margaret's leadership. "Is a great idea. Maybe someone in the community will recognize the locket or have information about her family." Margaret smiled at, her eyes filled with compassion. "Exactly, we're all connected in some way, and I believe someone will step forward." She glanced at Emily, who was still cradling Isabella. "We need to keep her safe and loved no matter what happens." Emily looked up, her expression thoughtful. "I wish I could do more. I want to give her a home and a family. I want her to feel wanted." David felt a wave of admiration for Emily. Her heart was as big as her dreams, and he realized that she, too, was searching for her place in the world. "We all want that for her," he said, his voice steady. "But we need to focus on finding her real family first." Later that evening, as the moon rose high in the sky, David found himself in his small office at the orphanage, sifting through old case files. The soft rustle of paper and the faint scent of aging books filled the air. He had a growing sense of emergency to dig deeper into Isabella's story. He flipped through pages until he stumbled upon a file that caught his eye. It was about Laura, the woman reported missing a year ago, the one whose name had surfaced during his earlier investigation. He studied the details carefully, piecing together information about Laura's life before her disappearance. The notes were sparse, but they painted a picture of a troubled woman who had faced her share of hardships. She must have been scared," he murmured, imagining the decisions that could lead a mother to abandon her child. A knock on the door startled him, and he looked up to see Margaret standing in the doorway. "David, I brought you some tea," she said, holding a steaming cup. "You've been working hard. You need to take care of yourself too." "Thanks, Margaret," he replied, accepting the cup. Gratefully, "I was just going through Laura's file again. I feel like there's more to her story that we need to uncover." Margaret nodded, her expression serious. "I know it's difficult, but we can't lose sight of the baby's needs. She deserves to be loved and cared for, no matter what we find out." David took a sip of the tea, its warmth spreading through him. "I want to help her, Margaret. I want to make sure she doesn't end up like I did." Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that you're already doing that, David, by facing your past. You're not just helping Isabella, you're helping yourself too. As the night wore on, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to find a way to connect Isabella to her family, to help her find the love he had longed for in his own life. He resolved to confront the demons of his past, believing that if he could do that, he would be able to guide Isabella toward a brighter future. The next day, Margaret's community meeting buzzed with anticipation. The townspeople gathered in the large hall, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. David stood at the front, his heart racing as he looked out at the crowd. Emily sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret began, her voice steady and warm. "We are here today to discuss the future of a baby who was recently left at our orphanage. Her name is Isabella, and we believe she may be connected to someone in this community." David could feel the weight of the room's attention as he stepped forward. "Isabella was found with a locket engraved with her name," he explained, holding up a picture of the locket if anyone recognizes it or has any information about Laura, the mother who went missing. "Please come forward." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and David felt a mix of hope and anxiety. People began to share their own stories, tales of loss, love, and family secrets. As each voice rose, David felt the threads of their lives weaving together, forming a tapestry of interconnectedness. "Laura used to work at the diner," an older woman said, her voice trembling. "She was a sweet girl, but something changed in her. I always worried about her. I saw her a few times in the park." Another man chimed in. "She looked lost, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." David listened intently, feeling the pieces of the puzzle start to align. It was clear that Laura's life had touched many, and in turn, Isabella's presence was stirring emotions within the community as the meeting continued. David felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps together they could uncover the truth about Isabella's origins, but amidst the shared stories and the growing sense of connection, Emily felt an itch of curiosity. She had been sitting quietly, her mind racing with thoughts of the locket. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She excused herself from the meeting and hurried back to the nursery where she had left the locket tucked away in a small drawer. As she pulled it out, she noticed something she had missed before: a tiny folded letter hidden inside the locket. Her heart raced as she carefully opened it. Her fingers trembling, the letter hinted at a family secret, a revelation that could change everything for Isabella. Without wasting a moment, Emily rushed back to the meeting, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. "Margaret," David called out, interrupting the ongoing discussions. The room fell silent. As everyone turned to look at her, curiosity etched on their faces. "I found something in the locket," she exclaimed, her voice filled with urgency. "It's a letter, and it talks about Isabella's family." The weight of her words hung in the air, a mixture of tension and anticipation building as everyone leaned in, eager to hear what Emily had to say. David felt a surge of adrenaline course through him, his heart pounding as he prepared for the revelation that could change everything. As Margaret, David, and Emily gathered around the small wooden table in the cozy office of the orphanage, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and uncertainty. The letter, still trembling in Margaret's hands, felt heavy with secrets and revelations, the old ceiling fan above word quietly casting dancing shadows across their faces as they leaned in, eyes wide with curiosity and concern. "Let's reread it," Margaret suggested, her voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions swirling within her. She unfolded the fragile parchment with care, the paper yellowed with age but still legible. It's essential we understand everything it says. David nodded, his brow furrowed as he considered the implications. If this baby is from a wealthy family, it changes everything we need to handle this delicately. Emily perched on the edge of her seat, couldn't contain her eagerness. What if they've been looking for her all this time? They might have been worried sick. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and fear, reflecting her desire for the baby to find a loving home. Margaret cleared her throat and began to read aloud, her voice steady but laced with emotion. To whom it may concern this, the letter serves as proof of the birth of Isabella Grace Thompson. Born on the March 14, 2022, she is the daughter of Richard and Elizabeth Thompson, residents of Maplewood Estate. As she read the names, the weight of the revelation settled heavily in the room. David's heart began to race. Maplewood Estate. I've heard of that place. It's one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the area. They must have resources to find her, he murmured, barely able to process the implications. Margaret looked up, her expression a mix of awe and dread. But what does this mean for Isabella? Do we just hand her over to them? What if they don't have her best interests at heart? Emily interjected, her voice softer, more contemplative. Maybe they've changed. Maybe they've been looking for her desperately. But what if they weren't good parents? What if they hurt her? The concern in her tone reflected her growing attachment to the baby, and Margaret could see how deeply Emily cared. We can't make assumptions about, David said, trying to maintain a level head. We need to gather more information. Perhaps we could reach out to them to see what their intentions are, but we should also be cautious. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, contemplating the next steps. Margaret rubbed her temples. This is so overwhelming. I've dedicated my life to protecting these children, and the thought of Isabella being returned to a family that might not cherish her, it terrifies me. Let's not forget. David added that we also need to protect the orphanage's integrity. If the family comes forward and claims her, we need to ensure that the process is transparent. Emily nodded, a frown creasing her brow. What if they don't want the baby after all? What if they just wanted to erase their past? What if they're hiding something? The silence that followed was thick with unsaid fears. Each of them was grappling with their own visions of what could happen next. Just then, a knock echoed from the front door, for breaking their every. Margaret straightened in her chair, her heart racing. Should I see who it is? Maybe it's someone with more information about the family, David suggested, standing up and moving toward the door. Emily watched David approach the door, the tension in her chest mounting. What if it's someone from the family? What if they've come to take Isabella? David opened the door, revealing a tall man with messy hair and a weary expression. The man's eyes darted nervously around the room before landing on the baby cradled in Margaret's arms. I'm looking for my daughter, he asserted, his voice a low rumble filled with desperation. Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she exchanged a glance with David, who stood frozen in the doorway. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I'm Richard Thompson, the man replied, stepping inside the orphanage, his demeanor shifting from anxious to assertive. I've been searching for Isabella for months. I need to see her. Isabella. Margaret echoed, her heart pounding wildly. The name felt foreign and familiar, all at once a rope to the very letter they had just read. Yes, Isabella Grace Thompson. He insisted on taking a step closer. Please, I have to see her. I need to explain, David interjected, his voice firm. What do you mean, explain? Who left her here, and why? Richard's expression soured, a shadow of pain crossing his face. That's not something I can discuss in a hallway. All I can say that there were circumstances beyond my control, my wife. He faltered, swallowing hard as emotions threatened to spill over. My wife was struggling. She wasn't well. I thought it was best for Isabella to be safe. Margaret's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. And you think bringing her back home is the solution? Home? Richard scoffed, a bitter edge to his tone. You think I have a home? You think I want to take her back to that place? What do you mean? Emily asked, stepping forward. Her curiosity piqued. Despite the tension in the air, Richard looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of anger and pain. The media painted a picture of a happy family, but after the incident, everything fell apart. We were lost. I never wanted to lose my daughter. I thought she would be better off, away from the chaos. Margaret felt her heart twist in her chest. But she's been here for weeks. She's safe, she's loved. I know, Richard replied, his voice softening. That's why I came. I want what's best for her. I just need a chance to explain. I need to make things right. David's mind raced as he considered the man before them. Was he frank? Or was this just a desperate plea from someone who had lost everything? You understand that we can't just hand her over. Without knowing more, right, Richard nodded, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on him. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I can be a father to her again. Just please let me see her. As the three of them exchanged glances, the enormity of the situation settled heavily in the air. They were standing at the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of not just Isabella's life, but their own as well. The future was uncertain, and the truth behind Isabella's origin was still shrouded in mystery. Margaret took a deep breath, her heart racing. Let's talk. We need to figure out what comes next. And as they settled into the uncertainty of the moment, the door to the orphanage remained ajar, a symbol of the challenges yet to come, waiting to unfold in a world where nothing was as it seemed.